Hi, I'm Deb McBride, and I'm an astrologer in New York City. Today, I want to talk to you about the astrology of the planet Mars, and that is because we are going to have some very interesting astrology of Mars this spring. And Mars is really an energy that we should familiarize ourselves with because it's important in our lives. It is what we call a personal planet, so it's a planet that is not transiting for many years in one place like the outer planets. Good, thank you. How are you? Good to see you. Welcome. And it's so important to sort of understand Mars because Mars is a strong, assertive energy. And this is where we assert ourselves. So where you have Mars in your chart is where you assert yourself and take action and are confident and reach for things in your life and set your goals. Mars is an energy where we feel we deserve things and we go after them. It's athletic energy. It's the zeal of life. It's passion. It's how we get up in the morning when we are excited to do something. Mars is not a sluggish planet. It is all about feeling excited and inspired and taking action and feeling good and being confident in our world. And it's an interesting experience because Mars is not always in a place in the zodiac or in our charts that is useful. Sometimes you may have a debilitated Mars, but you make the use of it. You make good use of it. And, I think Mars in a sign like Pisces is a little complicated and difficult because Mars is an action-oriented planet. Pisces is a sleep-oriented sign. So it may make you a little topsy-turvy when you're trying to assert yourself and you are initiating something and it's misunderstood, which is often what happens when you have Mars and Pisces. Right now, Mars is in the sign of Sagittarius, which is really good for Mars because it's fire. And Sagittarians are known for their fortune and their luck and their ambition and their energy. And so when we have Mars and Sagittarius, it's an energy that is well placed and we can go forth and be fruitful and be confident. And Sagittarians are often very confident people. I don't meet very many insecure Sagittarians unless they have other things in their chart that's kind of bringing back the Sagittarius energy. Mars is now in Sagittarius, and it is early Sagittarius, about 5 or 6 degrees Sagittarius. And I have my trusty ephemeris here telling me where the position of the planets are. And, it's the reason I want to talk about it is because Mars is going to do a little dance this year. And, Mars is actually at 3 degrees, almost 4 degrees Sagittarius. Now, if you're born in early Sagittarius, that would be the end of November, 25th, 26th, you're going to feel a lot of energy right now. And it's going to be that way for a little while because Mars' little dance is the retrograde dance. Now, Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. So the last time it was retrograde was 2 years ago in 2014 in the sign of Libra. And it was actually a very important retrograde because Mars danced between Uranus and Pluto and Jupiter and made that grand cross where 4 planets were like this in this grand cross. And Mars was really the trigger, and it was a lot of energy at the time. It was a lot of excitement, and it was very potent. And there were eclipses. Very interesting. Russians just launched the rocket to Mars, and that's very interesting. And there they are going to Mars. And Mars, when it retrogrades, appears to be traveling backwards, and sometimes looks a little closer than we would imagine it to be. So back in 2003, Mars was pretty close to the Earth, and you could see it very clearly. And I remember going out and seeing people with telescopes and them sharing their telescopes for people to look in and see Mars, and it was very exciting. Actually, you could see that red ball in the sky. And What's interesting is this year is that Mars will retrograde and go back into the sign of Scorpio. So for those unfamiliar with retrograde, what this means is from our vantage point on the Earth, it appears that the planet is traveling backwards. But planets can't really travel backwards. So imagine yourself on the subway in Paris, in New York City, anywhere, and you're on the train and you can see the train next to you in the tunnel, and it appears to be traveling backwards, but it's really the relative motion between your train and the train that's next to you in the tunnel. That's what retrograde is. It looks like that train next to you is going backwards, but it's really not. It's actually this motion of both trains and how it's working. Your train just pulled ahead of it. And that's the nature. It's very interesting. That's the nature of a retrograde. So when Mercury goes retrograde 3-4 times a year, that's the same thing happening, except that's the planet of communication. Mars is going to retrograde for 6 weeks because it normally spends 2 months in a sign, and those 2 months or 6 weeks or so, sometimes it travels a little faster in a sign. Usually there's a very potent area of your chart and you get a lot done, you're ambitious and you're motivated. But this is interesting because when Mars starts slowing down, and it's already slowing down, it will retrograde on April 17th and it will stay retrograde until June 29th. And then it'll go direct and start to move forward again. So it's going to hover in Sagittarius for a long time in those early degrees. So as I said, it's 3 degrees of Sagittarius now. Mars is going to retrograde in a month on the 17th of April. And between now and April 17th, it will only move 5 degrees. That's interesting because Mars is, like I said, it's fast. It's when you put your foot on the accelerator in your car. It's an energetic planet and it's slowing down. That means we're going to feel this, and we are going to feel the slow process of Mars grinding to a halt. And when Mars grinds to a halt, so does a lot of our ambition and our energy and our motivation and our action and our confidence. And so what do we do with this? Well, first of all, we're going to start noticing our energy change. Now, it isn't a fire sign, so it may not be like we can't move. You know, I remember this Mars retrograde in Pisces back in 2003 when it was kind of close to the Earth. And it was an interesting experience because Mars is slower in a water sign, and in Pisces it wants to kind of go to sleep. And I remember when it's stationed direct, it was like people I spoke to said they just didn't have the ambition or energy to move or do anything. And I understood that, and I explained that to them. But with Sagittarius, it'll be a little different. Sagittarius is, you know, they are ambitious, but they are also travelers and people of, you know, that we meet traveling, or people who we meet who speak other languages or other foreign cultures to us. And it's actually, you know, they're usually exciting people in our lives. And so with Mars traveling through Sag and then stopping on the 17th of April and then starting to appear to move backwards. So it'll go this far, only 8 degrees of Sagittarius, and then turn around, and then it's going to go into Scorpio, and it's going to stay in Scorpio for a few weeks there, and I can give you those exact dates. It's Mars will go back into Scorpio on the 28th of May. So before Mars went into Sagittarius a couple of weeks ago, it was in Scorpio for a couple months. So we had Mars enter Scorpio on January 4th and leave Scorpio for Sagittarius on March 7th. So it was really last week, March 7th, into Sagittarius. Now, Mars rules Scorpio. Mars and Pluto are the co-rulers of Scorpio. And Mars rules Scorpio because it's a good fit. It's, again, that ambition, the drive that Mars has, and Scorpios are often driven. And so this experience of Mars and Scorpio is good for Scorpio. So if you're a Scorpio and you had a couple months of Mars there in your sign, you're going to get some more energy from that again. So there's so much to say about this, because if you are a Scorpio, you've got that Mars vibe anyway, and then you're going to have this dose of Mars for 2 months that you just had, and then another another bunch of Mars for you. So this is a real good time for Scorpios to get things accomplished. And if you have, your chart and you have Scorpio in your 10th house, then your Mars is going through there. It's going to spend some time there, and you may get a lot done as far as your career goes, or your plans or your goals. So then we're going to see a month of Mars retrograde while it's in Scorpio, which is the entire month of June. And then Mars will turn around at 23 degrees of Scorpio. For a Leo person, this is their 4th house. So this is going to be something around, it's going to be family, siblings, depending on how Leo works. For Leo, it should, how far into Leo you are, that means. So it should be 3rd, 4th house. So it's going to be family, home, siblings, genealogy, historical stuff in family. And so the thing about Mars is the warrior planet. It's combative. So we know that it can cause some friction. And if you're a Leo and it's hitting your family house, you may have some conflict with your family. So you might want to keep an eye on that. And the conflict, now here's where things get very interesting with retrograde. Well, we're looking at when it goes into Scorpio. So that would be, for a Leo, I would say that would be the end of May and that whole month of June. And then we're looking at July, where Mars will still be in Scorpio until August 3rd, when Mars goes back into Sagittarius. So try to follow me. Mars is in Sagittarius now. It went in last Monday, the 7th. It's staying in Sagittarius until it will retrograde on the 17th of April, and it will stay in Sagittarius until the 27th of May, 28th. That's when you're going home. Well, that's when you're going to visit family, and that's when they're probably going to, it's going to be an adjustment period. So just be aware of this, and this is why we talk about these things, so that we can be aware and handle it, so that we can go into this having some information. So if you're going home or you're going to see your family in May, at the end of May or June, July, those are times, and you're a Leo, those are times when you might get combative, and just expect things to be a little combative with Mars, at that time. Now, this is not a time to start a war, a fight, anyone initiating a fight, or a war with anyone during a Mars retrograde will not win. Okay, so that means any country that wants to go to war, whoever drops the bomb first, or initiates the war, or initiates the argument, that is not going to go well for that person. It doesn't mean the other person's definitely going to win. It just means we are talking about Mars. We are talking about initiating a conflict on a Mars retrograde. You don't do it. If you initiate conflict on Mars retrograde, you can expect it. It's not going to go your way. So the best thing is bite your tongue. When you are experiencing a Mars retrograde, there's lots of things that you should not do. One of them is start a war. Another one of them is buy a new computer. Another one of them is buy a new car. And it does make sense. Anything, because the car slows down now, anything mechanical is going to slow down or not work right when Mars is retrograde. And this is the nature of Mars when it slows down. And it's a little out to lunch. I like to say, well, Mars is taking a little rest. Mars is taking a break. And when we experience, when Mars retrograde ends, it will be the 29th of June. So that 29th of June, then the 30th of June, you can buy a new car or lease a new car, or, buy a new computer. And then, you should be very careful about that. You could do your research during a Mars retrograde, but I wouldn't buy any new equipment then. What happens is that Mars gets a project launch, so you should be careful about that project launch. I tell people it's not great, it's not great to start something new during a Mars retrograde. It's good for a trial period. Like, say, for example, here's a good example, a Broadway show. A Broadway show that's going to try out in another city. So they go to Chicago or Boston or someplace and they do a tryout and a Broadway show while a Mars is retrograde, as opposed to trying to get the buzz going when on Broadway in Manhattan when there's a Mars retrograde. The buzz fizzles out. Something can fizzle out. And this goes for relationships as well. So when people get involved in relationships and think that there's all sorts of wonderful passion happening, you got to think twice about that during Mars retrograde. You have to think about what could potentially be a relationship that you want to go forward, and whether or not you want to be in it long term. You want to, and sometimes we just can't control that. You meet someone, you fall for them, you go forward with the relationship. It's particularly difficult with men. So any of us who are involved with men, girls, if you're looking for a new guy, men are a little bit out to lunch during Mars retrograde, and you just have to let them be. If you're already in a serious relationship and you're in a couple or you're married and you're living with a man, you can look at, there you are, you're a guy. Well, you might be a little bit out to lunch then, and be okay. Be in your cave, do what's right for you if you're a guy. Girls who like guys, guys who like guys. If you're trying to date someone new during the Mars retrograde, it might be a little bit of a problem, because the passion may, there you go, well, the passion may not be completely available. So maybe what you want to do is, if you can't help but get involved because the person's there, and if you don't get involved now, how's it going to happen? Then you get involved and you just accept it for the short term. And then after June and into July, it should get much better. It should get much more exciting. So another thing that can happen is, if you had a lover and you have lost your lover, it's possible that they return during a Mars retrograde. Now, this happens during Venus retrograde. You're welcome. Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, but especially Venus and Mars retrograde. Relationship planets, when they are retrograde, can be bringing back the people from the past out of the woodwork, and it's like, wow, I haven't thought of them or seen them in years. But you're okay. You just deal with it. Maybe you're just going to run into them in the coffee shop. Maybe you're going to run into them or just hear about them through another friend. That's fine. Getting re-involved with someone during a Mars retrograde has lots of interesting consequences. It doesn't mean it's going to be bad, but you haven't finished something from your last part of the relationship. And therefore, you're going to reconnect with them on some level and finish something off so that you can move forward. Oftentimes that happens. To reconnect with someone, well, maybe you started something and you didn't ever really get a chance to do anything with that person. You didn't get to date. You didn't start to have an intimate relationship. And then Mars retrograde happens, and then you finally go forward with that. Then I think that's a little different. I think that's a little different because you're reached back for this person who you started something with and then kind of didn't go there. But you should be careful, because it could still fizzle out, when Mars goes direct, or when we move forward in relationships. It's hard when the planet of ambition and energy is moving backwards. So we're trying to move something forward and something is moving backwards. That's why you don't want to get a new car during Mars retrograde. It's a very interesting time period. It's a good time period to work on a project and just sort of work solo on that. And when you are working on a project and just sort of going within and taking some real good thinking about it, and how is this going to work, and kind of stepping back. Mars retrograde will allow you to step back and take a step and think about this project and how it works and will it work. So one of the other things that is going to happen is that, I was talking about Mars going back into Scorpio. So if you have planets in Scorpio or Sagittarius, you should pay attention to this, because Mars is going to hit them. And if you have anything at the end of Scorpio, Another important thing that happened was that up until last summer, Saturn had been in Scorpio for about 2.5, 3 years. So Saturn had hit a point in Scorpio, and that Mars will come back and hit that same point. So this is really important because we want to look at back in our ephemeris and see where Saturn had been before it went out of, hello, welcome, before it left Scorpio. So the place where Mars will retrograde station direct is 23 degrees of Scorpio. What about Scorpios? They're going to get a dose of Mars coming back into their sign again. And Mars has been visiting Scorpio for 2 months. So January, February, people had Mars in Scorpio, and Scorpios probably felt a burst of energy and were a little more ambitious and a little more connected to their passions. Then at the end of May, we're going to have Mars going back into Scorpio, and it will stay there for 2 months. It's going to be there for all of June and all of July. And so when I go back, I look at October 2014. Think about what you were doing in October 2014, and that wasn't that long ago. It was like a year and a half ago. Think about what you're doing in October 2014. Whatever was happening in October of 2014 will be revisited by Mars coming into Scorpio again. So those people who have a planet or had some big, it can be a good thing. It could be a good thing. It depends on, you're finishing off something you might have started back in 2014. So this is actually, it could be really exciting. It could be really just the evolution of a project you're working on. It could also be, a place where you have, maybe you were hurt, maybe you had a breakup or something, and this is a really good point. What if you had a breakup back in October 14, and then this person comes back in your life during the Mars retrograde? That could very well be likely. The interesting thing is that, when we have Mars retrograde, we don't always have the same amount of energy that we normally have. So if you're sitting home, not ambitious and motivated to go to the gym, not to go swimming, not to go to the park, not to call your friends, then you can just chill out and don't be impatient with yourself. And this is not the time to be impatient. Not with Mars retrograde. You're not impatient under Mars retrograde. You just have to move forward as best you can and try not to start anything new. Usually if you start something new, you don't have a lot of control over it or a lot of power over it. And that's the only issue with the Mars retrograde. It's important to think about the relationships you start then. It's important to think about where you're going, your direction, your goals. Very important at that time. But it is a good time to step back and review, because whenever there's a retrograde, we review, we reconnect, we revise. There's a lot of revision going on. And that's something that you need to be aware of during Mars retrograde. And that's about it. So we're done for this evening. I thank you all for joining, and see you out there once again. Have a good night.